Thursday to each of you, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So 2 days removed from hitting a game-winning shot against arguably one of the top three teams in the NBA, there was no way Ja Morant was going to be able to top that performance, a 30-point performance as well with the game-winning shot. But once again, Ja amazes. Ja Morant outduels LeBron James, 41 points, 10 rebounds, a career-high 6 threes, and every bit of it was needed. On Ja's historic night, how he continues to step up in the biggest moments for the Grizzlies and why this Grizzlies team still has levels it has not reached yet. All on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. You can find me at StatsSAC. I'm a credentialed media member with the Grizzlies, your host here at Locked On Grizzlies every single day. 4 years covering the Grizzlies now. It's been a pleasure being here every single time I get to interact with everyone that loves the Grizzlies. You can find the show at Locked On Grizz on Twitter. You can find the podcast wherever it's available: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Free on all platforms and right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button below. Lets everyone know that you enjoyed the show. Lets others be able to find the show, and just in general makes the show as enjoyable as possible. And of course, want to remind you of our title sponsor for today's show, Truebill.com. Again, Truebill.com, the place for you to go if you want those free ads that you just want to sit there and dabble in, get an idea of a product, but you don't want them to turn into hidden costs. Truebill.com is the answer to your question. So if you're excited, if you are ecstatic right now, it's the holiday season still. Hope everybody again had a great Christmas, great holiday season. The new year is here. Everybody's probably getting the resolutions and trying to get started, get 2022 off to a great start. But if you're a Grizzlies fan, I don't know if there have been back-to-back games this year that should get you more excited than what we have seen from the Grizzlies in Ja Morant. On Monday, Ja, 33 points to go along with Desmond Bane's 32. An outstanding performance from Bane. But Ja Morant against the Phoenix Suns, against arguably the best backcourt in the NBA this calendar year, puts up the game-winning shot to give the Grizzlies a big victory despite being shorthanded. So there's no way, right? There's no way that Ja Morant could top that performance, even with LeBron James coming into Memphis. And don't get me wrong, if you don't think last night's performance against the Lakers topped what Ja did against the Suns because of the difference in quality of play this year between the Suns and the Lakers, okay. But I'm going to go ahead and say that last night was an even more historic and memorable performance for Ja Morant than his night against the Suns. But it didn't look like it was going to line up that way early in the game for the Grizzlies and Ja Morant. Ja Morant was fine. 16 points, the only 2 threes made in the first half. But the Grizzlies, they were feeling their lack of depth early on in the game last night. Not necessarily that they were winded or that they played tired. They just did not play effective or efficient at all. In the first half, 2 of 14 from 3. 7 total assists. Only 4 points off 9 forced turnovers. The Grizzlies were winning the paint battle. They were forcing turnovers more than the Lakers were. They just couldn't convert. The Grizzlies could not get hardly anything to fall outside of Ja Morant. And at the end result, they were down 54-48. But then, as the second half came out, that's when the fun really got started. Despite Ja Morant's performance, which we'll get into in just a second, LeBron James had one of his more memorable games in recent history. 37 points and 8 threes, only the third time in his career he has had 8 or more threes in a game. But the really big fun part of it was that early on in the second half, it was Ja and LeBron swapping baskets back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was a lot of fun to see. But the rest of the Lakers were also playing better off LeBron than the Grizzlies were playing better off Ja. And so the Lakers got up once again. They were up by, I believe, as many as 16 in the first half and got up as many as 12 in the third quarter. But Ja kept coming back, and he hit a couple of big shots at the end of the third to get within 5. But then that's when Ja Morant stood out. It was Ja Morant who came alive in the fourth quarter, converting threes, getting shots to go in, and ending up with 41 points. And every one of them was needed as the Grizzlies were able to get the win. But before we get into Ja, which we will for a good part of the show, the other thing that stood out in the second half was that the Grizzlies once again made key halftime adjustments. That has been a struggle of the Grizzlies so far this year, especially when it comes to the third quarter of games. But they were able to make adjustments, mainly playing better defense. They only allowed 45 second half points to the Lakers, and they were able to shoot the three better. 2 of 14 from beyond the arc to start in the first half, 8 of 16 in the second half. Of course, Ja being 4 or 5 in the second half certainly worked out, but Desmond Bane hit a few threes. Others hit a few threes as well. The Grizzlies were able to find their offensive balance, letting Ja do his thing, which you needed to. On a night like last night, you want the offense to be as balanced as possible. You want Desmond Bane and Jaren to be contributing as much as possible, but there are just some nights where you just want your best player to take over, and that's what the Grizzlies let Ja Morant do. But the big key difference in the second half versus the first half is that the Grizzlies supported Ja's 25 points with 8 threes, or with 4 threes of their own. So the Grizzlies' balance in the second half is what truly stood out. But make no mistake about it, the story of the night was Ja Morant. He scored 41 points, and the amazing thing about it is that Ja has continued to improve the quality of how he gets his points each and every time out that he gets 30, 35, 40. We'll discuss that in the second segment. But Ja also has a bit of a flair. He has a bit of excitement. He gets a bit more amped up when it comes to playing LeBron and the Lakers. He's only the 9th player in NBA history to have consecutive 40-point games against the Lakers. And let's not forget, in his rookie year, back in February of 2020, Ja Morant arguably had his most complete game of his rookie year against the Lakers. 27 points, 14 rebounds in that game. So once again, Ja steps up in either going against the most featured teams in the NBA or the best teams in the NBA. Ja Morant has consistently stepped up and showed just how valuable he is. And again, not that it was a question. Ja already answered the question from that Phoenix game, that the Grizzlies are better off with him on offense. But again, he shows he could do it in multiple ways. Against Phoenix, it was him being able to go to be in a combo with Desmond Bane. The inside scoring of Ja to go with the outside scoring of Bane, that balance was needed to beat a team of the quality of Phoenix. But then last night, when the Grizzlies offense and team as a whole was not playing well, Ja Morant put the Grizzlies on his shoulders and he carried them to victory. Ja Morant outdueled the king. LeBron James is arguably the best player in the history of the NBA, and he played like that at times last night. He made, once again, 8 threes, something he's only done 3 times in his career, and Ja Morant was still able to outperform him and beat him. If you need more valid proof, not that you needed any, but if you still needed valid proof, it's amazing how Ja Morant just keeps getting more valid and more valid and more valid with his performances as to proof that he's a superstar. The game winner against a true title contender in Phoenix, and then being able to outduel LeBron James when LeBron James was at his best to get a win. There's probably not a better duo of games, back-to-back games at least, in Ja Morant's career that shows how spectacular of a superstar he truly is. All-star, absolutely. All-NBA, he keeps playing like this. He's got a legit shot. But superstar, you're damn right. And that's how exciting it is to see. But a big reason, again, why, besides these 2 games, that Ja Morant truly is a superstar is that he continues to play at his best against the best. I'll explain that in just a moment. But let's first talk about Truebill. Now, it's the holiday season, and also you probably are going into the new year with plenty of different things that you'd like to check out. And sometimes that leads to you wanting to sign up for free trials. Well, the thing is, you don't want those free trials to turn into hidden costs. And if that's the case, you want to choose Truebill. Truebill is a great way for you to be able to line up your subscriptions, organize them, and keep up with them, and be able to get an idea of when those free trials were to expire. On average, Truebill saves its users $720 a year. All you got to do is line up your subscriptions there. It keeps up with the free trials, but in overall, it's just a great way to keep up with your subscriptions as a whole. Make sure you go to Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA to check out Truebill today. It could literally save you thousands this year. Listen, we can't thank you enough for joining the Locked On Grizzlies podcast as your first listen of the day, but why not check out the Locked On Now podcast? It's the ability for you to get all the latest reactions from all that's going on around the league, including myself, my reaction to Ja, my reaction to the game over Phoenix, all that, and all the great reactions around the NBA every single day. Check out the Locked On Now podcast as your second listen of the day after you check out Locked On Grizzlies. So obviously, yes, two of Ja's best career games have come over the past two games, two of his biggest statement games, considering who he was playing. But consider this. Ja Morant now has 18 games in his career in which he has scored 30 or more points. But the crazy thing is that we talk about the fact that he's done it 18 times now in 154 games. But the thing is, again, is that with how many games the Grizzlies have played over this calendar year, Ja, the 2020-2021 season started on December 23rd, 2020. So we're just over a year since the 2020-2021 season started. In just over a year, just over a calendar year, 18 of Ja's 18 of Ja's 30-point games, 17 of Ja's 18 30-point games have happened this calendar year. If you go back to the first game of last year against the San Antonio Spurs, Ja Morant had 44 points, 9 assists, a historic night for a 21-year-old. But since then, Ja overall has put together 18 30-point games in his career, 10 35-point games. Even though he has only played 154 games of his career, Ja Morant at 10 35-point games already has 3 more 35-point games than any other Grizzlies player in franchise history. The highest any other Grizzlies player has in franchise history is 7 35-point games, and Ja has 10. But now he's put together another 40-point game, his fourth 40-point game in his career, double that of any other Grizzlies player in franchise history. There has never been a scoring talent that is put on a Grizzlies uniform to the extent of Ja Morant. Now, if you want to get crazy and say Vince Carter or Allen Iverson or those, that's fine. But in terms of scoring with the Grizzlies uniform on, let me clarify it that way, there's never been a talent like Ja Morant. But the thing that stands out when you really look at how productive he is the fact that the quality of his scoring outputs to this level continue to improve. But also, it continues to happen against the best teams in the NBA. For instance, Ja has 10 35-point games, but he also has 2 others that for some god-awful reason don't count. He had a 35-point game in the bubble against Portland when the Grizzlies lost in their attempt to make the 1920 playoffs. He had 35 against Golden State, 35 and 5 threes in the play-in game that got the Grizzlies into the 2021 playoffs. So he's actually had 12 games in his career with 35 points. But the thing is that they've come up in the biggest moments. Again, as I mentioned, Ja is only the 9th player to have 2 consecutive 40-point games against the Los Angeles Lakers. He stepped up against the most premier organizations in the NBA. But he also this year has scored over the past calendar year, he's scored 30 points 4 times against Utah. Now, granted, he's played Utah more. The Grizzlies have played Utah more than any other team has played Utah. But Utah arguably has been one of, if not one of the 3 most successful teams over this past calendar year. And Ja Morant has scored 30 points against them 4 separate times, including a franchise record 47 points for the Grizzlies in the playoffs. So it's not only Ja Morant getting more consistent at being a takeover scorer, at being an ultimate scorer, carrying the team on his shoulders as a premier scorer when he needs to. It's not him being able to do that more often that's exciting. It's the fact that it consistently shows on the biggest moments. over half of Ja's 30-point games have come against title contenders in the 2021 calendar year. Milwaukee, 4 times against Utah, against Golden State, against the Lakers, if you want to count them as that. If you don't, that's fine, but it's still LeBron James. My point is that Ja Morant knows that there are going to be times when the Grizzlies offense is going to simply come down to him. It's going to have to come down to him taking over games. And it's not only the fact that he's consistently being able to do it more frequently at will when he wants to. It's happening against some of the best teams in the NBA on a consistent basis. But also consider this. In the first 11 games of Ja Morant's, in the first 11 of his 18 games where he scored 30 or more points, there were 10 of those 11 games, Ja had 2 or less threes in those 11 games. Ja Morant, now, when it comes to scoring from 3 in his 30-point games, in the first 11 30-point games of Ja's career, 10 of those 11 games, he made 2 or less threes. In 6 of his last 7 30-point games, he's had 2 or more threes. The three-point shot is becoming a bigger part of Ja Morant's scoring output. And last night was a perfect example with the career-high 6 threes. That's how exciting it is also. It's not just the fact that Ja is scoring 30 points more frequently. It's not just the fact that Ja is doing it against the best teams in the NBA, but that he's doing it in a more balanced approach because he's becoming more resourceful. Again, in 6 of his last 30-point outbursts, Ja Morant has 2 or more threes. You combine that with the ability for him to get into the lane, plus the ability to get to the free throw line, you're seeing a more resourceful scorer. That's why Ja has been able to score 30 or more points more frequently, and it's coming against the best teams in the league because he's becoming more resourceful as a scorer. So when you see Ja score 30, when you see him score 35, when you see him score 40, it's becoming so commonplace that you're not surprised anymore. But it's not just the points in the box score that matter. It matters who they're coming against. It matters that they're coming in games where the Grizzlies' offense overall is not performing well, and they have to have every bit of Ja's performance to win games, but also the quality of the scoring outputs continues to improve as well. And that's what's so magnificent. That's why Ja Morant is a superstar, because he's not only putting the counting statistics out there, the quantity is not only out there more frequently, but the quality continues to improve as well. And that's what the Grizzlies need on a night in, night out basis, especially right now, while being shorthanded and also coming up on a very tough January schedule. But I mentioned New Year's resolutions, and while Ja Morant continuing to play like a superstar is no resolution, it's here, it's now. It was a revelation earlier this year. It's now just a consistent reality now. But when it comes to New Year's resolutions, I do have 3 things that I'd like the Grizzlies to do. But the big thing about all 3 of them is that I'm simply asking the Grizzlies to do things that they have done in the past. I'll explain in just a moment. So, of course, the other thing that I can tell you is this, is that with the new year here, we obviously are in the middle of college football bowl season. And so that means that if you enjoy wagering and betting on sports, one of the best opportunities for you to be able to do that, of course, is for you to be able to do that through betonline.ag, the fastest and easiest way for you to be able to get in on all your betting and wagering action. NFL, NHL, NBA, UFC, whatever you choose to enjoy betting on, betonline.ag is the best place for you to do it. If you head to the website on your mobile device, on your laptop, you put in the promo code Locked On, you'll get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Make sure to check out betonline.ag, the #1 sports betting site, the fastest and easiest way for you to bet on all your sports action. On tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we're going to take a look around the Southwest Division. The Grizzlies now are 5 games up in the Southwest Division, but are any other teams in the Southwest Division really positioning themselves to take off in 2022 to potentially take on the Grizzlies? And the reason why we're doing that is because tomorrow night we are facing a familiar foe for the first time this year. The San Antonio Spurs will preview the New Year's Eve bash between the San Antonio Spurs and the Grizzlies on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So Ja Morant, again, performing like a superstar more frequently, in a more quality performance, consistently doing it against the best teams in the NBA, all those things are happening, and it's great to see going into 2022. And without a doubt, the Grizzlies are in a very good position. Last night, the Kings, on a last-second three-point shot, beat the Dallas Mavericks. And so that means that the Grizzlies are now 5 games up in the division. That's correct. 5 games up in the division against the rest of their division. The biggest lead they've ever had in the Southwest Division. Plus, the Grizzlies are also now 3.5 games up in fourth place. There is a 3.5 game difference between the Grizzlies in the 4th position in the West and who is in the 5th position in the West. But also, even more importantly than that, the Grizzlies are also now 5 games up, not only in the division, but also out of the play-in game. So going into 2022, the Grizzlies are in an extremely good position to be able to not only make the playoffs, but maintain potentially the ability to have home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs, but at the very least to stay out of the play-in game. That's how exciting and how outstanding their December has been. But of course, the Grizzlies are dealing, just like many teams around the NBA are, they're consistently dealing with roster shakeups due to COVID-19. Late last night, it was announced for the 4th time, the Grizzlies had signed Dakota Mathias to a 10-year hardship contract. He joins Tyrell Terry, Shaq Buchanan, who congratulations to Shaq Buchanan on the first points of his career last night, as well as Xavier Sneed. Dakota Mathias is the 4th player the Grizzlies have signed to a hardship contract due to the dealings that they're having with COVID-19. Now, the hope is that these players that the Grizzlies are signed, no offense to them, they're only going to stay around for a short while. Because hopefully, after the game against the Spurs tomorrow night, the Grizzlies will have 2 days off over the weekend to celebrate the new year before they go on a very hard road trip, facing off on back-to-back nights next Sunday against the Nets and then next Monday against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So you certainly hope that the Grizzlies may be able to get 1 or 2 of Melton, Dillon, and others back to get some of their depth and obviously to get some of their best players back as well. But the Grizzlies are a bit shorthanded right now, but they have continued to be able to overcome that by relying on one of the best backcourts in the NBA in Desmond Bane and Ja Morant. But while Ja Morant has been spectacular, been historic with his performances over the past 2 games, obviously Desmond Bane has played a big part in that as well. But the first resolution that I want to get to is the Grizzlies simply getting back to shooting the 3 well. Before the second half of last night's game, where the Grizzlies went 8 of 16, in their previous 5 games, which included 2 wins, but before that, a 3-game losing streak, the Grizzlies were struggling shooting from 3. Over that 5-game stretch, the Grizzlies actually were the worst 3-point shooting team in the NBA. In that 5-game stretch, Desmond Bane was 19 of 41 from 3, good for nearly 48%. The rest of the Grizzlies were 29 of 110, good for 26%. That's not going to cut it, typically. That's why Desmond Bane has been so important for Memphis, is because the Grizzlies overall, they've struggled shooting the 3 overall in the month of December. So the first resolution is getting back to shooting the 3. Now, there's a simple way for this to happen. That's Jaren Jackson Jr. being able to find his stroke. While he has certainly played very well at times, especially with Ja being out and defensively this month, Jaren Jackson Jr.'s shot, unfortunately, has struggled for the month of December. If Jaren can simply get his shot going once again, you've now got his shooting ability with Desmond Bane's shooting ability. That honestly could be one of the better shooting combinations in the league and certainly could balance out Ja's inside scoring with some outside shooting. So the big thing for me for the Grizzlies, their first resolution is finding their stroke from 3 once again to support how well Desmond Bane has been shooting the ball over the past month plus. The second thing is health. While it's amazing to see that the Grizzlies potentially could go 12-4 in the month of December and potentially be 9 games above 500 going into the new year, there is absolutely truth to the claim that we have not seen the Grizzlies at their true best. We truly haven't. There is another level, in my opinion, to this Grizzlies team. And the reason why, the Grizzlies total now being 22-14. The Grizzlies have played 36 games this year. In only 7 of those 36 games, the Grizzlies have had Desmond Bane, Dillon Brooks, Ja Morant, as well as Jaren Jackson Jr. That's correct. They've only had those players 7 times over the past 30 or 7 times in this 36-game stretch. So there is another level to this Grizzlies team if they could consistently have their 4 best players playing. While it may be surprising to hear that, that is something that certainly is the truth. Only 7 times this year, Dillon Brooks, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Ja Morant have shared the court. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that means the Grizzlies are all of a sudden going to become one of the top 5 teams in the league. The overall results in those 7 games so far have not been too encouraging. But I will say that for the Grizzlies to have the best shot of getting where they want to be in the playoffs and then potentially exceeding expectations with maybe a playoff series win in the playoffs, they're going to need all 4 of those players on the court. So more games of Bane, Brooks, Morant, and Jaren Jackson Jr. on the court certainly will help things out. And it lends truth to the idea that we truly have not seen the Grizzlies at their highest level as of yet. But one other key resolution that I feel is important is getting back to having successful third quarters. For me, that is a huge, huge development for the Grizzlies. We saw it on Sunday against the Kings. The Grizzlies struggled in the first half and absolutely came out all guns blazing, absolutely on fire in the third quarter against the Kings. But they struggled against the Phoenix Suns on Monday night in the third quarter. They struggled against the Lakers last night in the third quarter. One of the trademarks of Taylor Jenkins in his first few years as the Grizzlies head coach has been the ability to make adjustments at halftime, especially defensively, and for the Grizzlies to be one of the best third quarter teams in the league. They were one of the top 5 third quarter teams in the league just last year, but this year they've been bottom third for most of the year. If the Grizzlies can figure out how to get back to once again making key adjustments at halftime, and we certainly know Taylor Jenkins and the team is capable of doing it, if they can get back to doing that, they then will once again get closer to playing that full 48 minutes that the players and Taylor Jenkins always talk about. So the key resolutions for me are simply the Grizzlies refinding their stroke from 3, especially Jaren, to support Desmond. And if Ja, who now is shooting 38% from 3 on just under 5 3-point attempts per game, if those 3, and you get Dillon and you get Melton back, if you can get those guys again getting consistent and hitting their shots, the Grizzlies can easily have the 3-point shot be a reliable and featured part of their offense. They've just got to get their guys going at the same time. That's the first resolution. The second is simply health. Getting Ja, Desmond, Dillon, and Jaren on the court at the same time for more than 1 out of every 5 games, like has been the case so far this season. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is once again refinding how effective they truly can be and how effective Taylor Jenkins can be in the third quarters of games. But at the end of the day, if all this can happen, that's great. But what it comes down to, night in and night out, when it comes to the Memphis Grizzlies, when it comes to their success, when it comes to the fan base enjoying them, when it comes to the rest of the NBA, recognizing just how special this franchise can be, it all comes down to one player. And last night may have been the biggest example of that. And his name is Ja Morant. An absolutely outstanding performance for Morant. A great way to put together 2 back-to-back wins when this Grizzlies team had been struggling with 3 straight losses and a less than ideal performance for most of the game against Sacramento. Whenever this Grizzlies team seems like it may be taking even a bit of a step back, Ja Morant is right there to put them on his shoulders and get them back going in the right direction. And my, what a fun direction we are headed in 2022. Ja Morant, superstar, outdueled the King, an absolutely outstanding performance. Hopefully one of many that we'll continue to see for the rest of this NBA season. Can't thank you enough for joining us here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. The last show of 2022, or 2021, will be tomorrow, previewing the game against the Spurs and talking about the rest of the Southwest Division. Can't wait to talk to you then. Have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.